I want to tell you a little story about Google, because a number of years ago, Google confronted this exact problem. They were trying to figure out why some of their teams were so successful and other teams that looked very, very similar would fail miserably. And so they launched a project that they called Google Project Aristotle. And the point of Project Aristotle was to collect data on the best and the worst teams and try and figure out what made the difference. And so for 2 years, they collected this data. And eventually they came up with 5 things that the best teams do that make them the best teams. The 5 patterns that they consistently saw among team leaders and members that helped people excel. And they were pretty straightforward, right? For instance, they needed structure and clarity on the teams. People needed to know what their role was. Dependability. People needed to know that they could depend on each other, that if somebody said they were going to do something, they'd actually do it. They needed to know that their work had meaning and that it was going to have impact on the company. But the number one most important thing, the thing that mattered more than anything else, was psychological safety. What Google found is that if a team didn't have psychological safety, it didn't matter if they had the other 4 things or 10 things or 20 things. Without psychological safety among team members, people could not align to get things done. They could not become the best performing teams. And so what is psychological safety? Psychological safety is an environment that allows us to feel safe when we're in an environment with other people. It allows us to bring our best selves to work, to believe that even if we say something in a meeting that people disagree with, that they're not going to hold it against us. They're not going to punish it for us. They're not going to bully us into joining their opinion. They're going to listen and they're going to respond. So now that Google knew that they needed to create psychological safety, the question becomes, how do you do that? So again, they went back to the data and they looked and they looked and they looked to try and figure out what the best teams were doing to create psychological safety. And what they found was that there were 2 elements that more than anything else made a huge difference whether psychological safety would emerge. The first is something called social security. What they found is that when people felt like others really listened to them, that they felt safe, a sense of social safety and social security in that room. They also noticed that on the best teams, that people seemed to speak in roughly equal proportion. Now, that doesn't mean everyone spoke the same number of minutes in every single meeting, but it did mean that over a set of meetings, everyone would speak basically the same amount. They would, in other words, make their voices heard and believe that others were listening to what they have to say. So how do we do this in teams? How do we get teams to do these 2 things? Well, it turns out that the way to do it is you create team habits.